Great, now we're ready to start the third tutorial about the Pandas library. We're going to look at summary functions and mapping, basically creating new columns and rows and transforming columns and rows. Let's dive right into these functions and mapping. In this case, you're also at the same time loading this wine reviews data set. Let's take a look at that data set. You can see there are about 130,000 rows and 14 columns. Country, description, the points, which is the rating of that particular wine, where the wine is from, the person who left that wine, the varietal, and the vineyard from the wine is from. Lots of different sort of metadata about each of these wine reviews themselves. Each row is a wine review. You can see here the 4 of those rows. Just a reminder, these dots just mean that there's quite a few rows in between 0 and 1 and the end of the data frame. The first category we'll look at here is ways to describe what's called summary functions, way to describe the data set. So for example, if we look at reviews and we consider the points column, we can use a function called .describe, which basically goes through and does a statistical analysis in a sense and creates these aggregated functions of that particular column. So the column itself, if you remember, is the points, which is the 0 to 100 points, with 100 being like the perfect wine ever, 0 being just absolutely terrible. And here you can see the mean is 88. There are different quantiles that are being hidden right now from you. The 75th percentile is 91 points and the max is 100. So there's a few wines that are considered perfect in there. This is a high-level summary of a column that contains integers. You can also look at columns that contain strings here, taster names, so the name of the person, names of people in that. There's 19 different unique names, meaning so in that whole column out of 130,000 rows, you've got only 19 total people that are in there. The number 1 is Roger Voss, who has over 25,000 reviews. You can take the mean, you can take the max, minimum, you can get the different quantiles. There is a really handy individual function called .unique, which is going to, if you go back to the taster name, it'll go through and aggregate or basically pull out all of the unique names of people who left reviews. So as we mentioned before, I think there was 19 different names, and here you can actually pull those names out. Another function which is really, really useful is something called value counts. So not only knowing that there are 19 different people, also knowing how many unique, or for each of those names, how many rows include that name. So Roger Voss here, 25,000 reviews. The next most common person is Michael with 15,000. And then down here at the bottom, Christina Pickard only has 6 reviews in here. So this is a way to understand and pull out information about what's going on inside the data set. Let's pop over to mapping and the apply function, .map and .apply. These are a little bit more advanced functions, but are super useful because they're essentially like in Excel or in spreadsheets where you create a new column and you create some sort of fancy formula that goes in that column to be able to take, different columns and add them together or subtract, or kind of the stuff that you do all the time in spreadsheets. The .map and .apply functions allow you to do that. So let's take a look first at a relatively simple version of .map. Here you can see that we created a new variable called review underscore points underscore mean, which is getting basically the mean values of each of that particular column. And then in this next row, we're using .map on the .points column. .map has a certain notation, which is a little bit unique. It has what's called a lambda function. And basically what it's doing is lambda p is saying that it's taking within this column each of the values in each row and subtracting that value, subtracting review, basically the mean from the value that's in that row. So what you end up with is a series that's returned that is, in this first row, the points in that row are 1.14 points less than the mean. So that particular wine is less than average. So you could take this series and essentially create a new column. If you remember how to do that, you can create a new column by just indicating the name of that new column equals to the series, and you would create a new column that is basically the difference between each of the rows of the points of the reviews versus the mean. Dot apply is a little bit even more advanced, but is, like I said, also very useful. Here you see a new function. If you remember back in Python, we learned about functions. This function is defined as the name remean underscore points. The input for that function is row. If you look here, you can see that row dot points, it's basically redefining each of the rows as each row, the points minus the mean this function has access to, because it was just created. And then it's using dot apply to apply this function to each of the columns in this particular data set. What we end up with now is a redefined points column. So it's gone through and changed the points column to whatever was there before, subtracting the mean value of the entire points column. So if it's negative, it means that this wine is this number of points below average. And if it's positive, this is the number of points above average that this wine has. So this is, like I said, it's once again, in this case where this function is redefining that particular column, but you can imagine we could create a new column that has this new calculation like we do in a spreadsheet. In this next line of code, it just shows you that first row of the original reviews. We didn't, in this code up here, change the original data frame. We simply just outputted what would happen if we apply this particular function to the data frame. If you wanted to actually permanently change that particular column, which here you can see it's still intact at 87, you would have to redefine the data frame reviews with what was outputted up here to get that to basically be saved. Or a lot of times I create new data frames with different names in order to keep the original data frame intact and have the new data frame for me to use. Once again, there's more than one way of doing things in Pandas. In this case, we can see that creating this column, there's other ways of doing it by simply just creating this new column called review points mean. You can also just subtract one column from another, or one column, like this column minus the series, and get the same type of output. Here you can see at the bottom, you can do basic arithmetic, and you can even do string-based manipulation by just calling different columns of a data frame. Here we're calling the country column, and over here the region column. We're adding a string in between, which is a space dash space. And what you end up with then a series that is France-Alsace. Once again, it's probably useful sometimes to create a new column by, creating reviews, region, and we'll just do that right now. So we'll say reviews, let's say region, let's look at reviews, see the data frame here. And you can see here off on the very right-hand side is a new column called region where we've added those two previous columns together. So if you'd like to keep going and really solidify your knowledge, there's an exercise for understanding summary functions and mapping for Pandas data frames.